When will a coronavirus vaccine be ready? Even at their most effective, and draconian, containment strategies have only slowed the spread of the respiratory disease COVID-19. With the World Health Organization finally declaring a pandemic, all eyes have turned to the prospect of a vaccine because only a vaccine can prevent people from getting sick. About 35 companies and academic institutions are racing to create such a vaccine, at least 4 of which already have candidates they have been testing in animals. The first of these, produced by Boston-based biotech firm Moderna, will enter human trials in April. This unprecedented speed is thanks in large part to early Chinese efforts to sequence the genetic material of SARS-CoV-2, the virus that causes COVID-19. China shared that sequence in early January, allowing research groups around the world to grow the live virus and study how it invades human cells and makes people sick. But there is another reason for the head start. Though nobody could have predicted that the next infectious disease to threaten the globe would be caused by a coronavirus, flu is generally considered to pose the greatest pandemic risk. Vaccinologists had hedged their bets by working on prototype pathogens. Coronaviruses have caused 2 other recent epidemics, severe acute respiratory syndrome (SARS) in China in 2002-04, and Middle East respiratory syndrome (MERS), which started in Saudi Arabia in 2012. In both cases, work began on vaccines that were later shelved when the outbreaks were contained. One company, Maryland-based Novavax, has now repurposed those vaccines for SARS-CoV-2, and says it has several candidates ready to enter human trials this spring. Moderna, meanwhile, built on earlier work on the MERS virus conducted at the U.S. National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases in Bethesda, Maryland. SARS-CoV-2 shares between 80% and 90% of its genetic material with the virus that caused SARS, hence its name. Both consist of a strip of ribonucleic acid (RNA) inside a spherical protein capsule that is covered in spikes. The spikes lock onto receptors on the surface of cells lining the human lung, the same type of receptor in both cases, allowing the virus to break into the cell. Once inside, it hijacks the cell's reproductive machinery to produce more copies of itself, before breaking out of the cell again and killing it in the process. All vaccines work according to the same basic principle. They present part or all of the pathogen to the human immune system, usually in the form of an injection and at a low dose, to prompt the system to produce antibodies to the pathogen. Antibodies are a kind of immune memory which, having been elicited once, can be quickly mobilized again if the person is exposed to the virus in its natural form. Traditionally, immunization has been achieved using live, weakened forms of the virus, or part or whole of the virus once it has been inactivated by heat or chemicals. Some of the COVID-19 vaccine projects are using these tried and tested approaches, but others are using newer technology. One more recent strategy, the one that Novavax is using, for example, constructs a recombinant vaccine. Clinical trials, an essential precursor to regulatory approval, usually take place in 3 phases. The first, involving a few dozen healthy volunteers, tests the vaccine for safety, monitoring for adverse effects. The second, involving several hundred people, usually in a part of the world affected by the disease, looks at how effective the vaccine is, and the third does the same in several thousand people. President Trump sowed confusion when, at a meeting at the White House on the 2nd of March, he pressed for a vaccine to be ready by the U.S. elections in November, an impossible deadline. But most vaccinologists think this vaccine will not be ready before 18 months. That's already extremely fast, and it assumes there will be no hitches. Because pandemics tend to hit hardest those countries that have the most fragile and underfunded healthcare systems, there is an inherent imbalance between need and purchasing power when it comes to vaccines. During the 2009 H1N1 flu pandemic, for example, vaccine supplies were snapped up by nations that could afford them, leaving poorer ones short. But you could also imagine a scenario where, say, India, a major supplier of vaccines to the developing world, not unreasonably decides to use its vaccine production to protect its own 1.3 billion strong population first, before exporting any. The pandemic will probably have peaked and declined before a vaccine is available. A vaccine could still save many lives, especially if the virus becomes endemic or perennially circulating, like flu, and there are further, possibly seasonal, outbreaks. But until then, our best hope is to contain the disease as far as possible. To repeat the sage advice, wash your hands.